You glance at a medical bracelet, a donor card, a form asking for your blood type, a single letter, and a plus or minus sign that feels almost arbitrary, like a detail your body picked at random, no more meaningful than eye color or shoe size. It was not random. That letter is a fossil, a working piece of ancient machinery still running inside you, older than your species itself, quietly doing a job it was built for, long before anyone thought to ask why it existed. Blood types were not discovered until remarkably recently. Physician Karl Landsteiner identified the ABO blood group system in 1901, work that later earned him a Nobel Prize, after he noticed that mixing blood from different people sometimes caused it to clump dangerously and sometimes did not. Before Landsteiner's discovery, doctors attempting blood transfusions had no idea why some patients survived the procedure while others died almost immediately, and the practice had been largely abandoned as too dangerous to risk. Landsteiner's insight that people fell into distinct categories based on how their blood reacted with others finally explained the pattern and made safe transfusion possible for the first time. For decades afterward, blood type was treated mostly as a medical inconvenience, something to check before a transfusion and otherwise ignore. Nobody was asking why these differences existed in the first place, or how long they had actually been part of the human story. Geneticist Laure Ségurel, working in France, decided to trace the ABO gene back through evolutionary time to find out. Her 2012 study, analyzing DNA sequences across humans and closely related primate species, found something startling. The genetic variation behind different blood types is millions of years old, old enough that it predates the split between humans and chimpanzees entirely. Ségurel's team found strikingly similar blood type variation preserved independently across multiple primate lineages, a pattern that almost never survives by pure accident across such an enormous stretch of evolutionary time. Some of your blood type variants are, in a very literal genetic sense, older than your entire species, inherited from an ancestor so far back it was not yet fully human. Genes that old and that consistently present across millions of years of evolution are usually doing something important, since evolution tends to eliminate variation that serves no purpose, quietly editing out anything that costs more than it gives back. So what has kept blood type diversity alive for so long, generation after generation, resisting the kind of slow erasure most neutral genetic differences eventually face? Physician Peter Rowe of the University of Edinburgh found part of the answer studying malaria, one of the deadliest infectious diseases in human history, responsible for shaping human genetics in more ways than almost any other single disease. Rowe's research found that people with type O blood are significantly less likely to develop the most severe, life-threatening form of malaria compared to people with other blood types. The malaria parasite, once it infects a red blood cell, needs to bind clusters of infected cells together to hide from the immune system and clog small blood vessels, a process that depends heavily on the specific sugar molecules coating the cell surface. The malaria parasite appears to struggle to anchor itself as effectively to type O red blood cells, giving carriers of that blood type a genuine survival edge in regions where malaria has always been a serious threat. Picture what that protection actually meant across thousands of generations in a malaria-heavy region. A village where type O carriers quietly survived infections that killed their type A and type B neighbors at higher rates, not dramatically, not every single time, but often enough that the underlying genetics shifted slowly with each generation, each surviving child a small statistical nudge toward one blood type over another. A mother watching two children come down with the same fever, unaware that something invisible in their blood had already partly decided how the illness would go. Nobody understood why some people survived fevers that killed others nearby. The trait simply worked, silently favored by disease long before anyone had a word for genetics, let alone a way to explain it to the people whose lives depended on it. That same logic extends across other infections too, and researcher Ajit Varki of the University of California, San Diego, has spent years studying exactly why. Varki's comparative work across primate species found that blood group antigens, the specific sugar molecules coating red blood cells that actually determine your blood type, interact directly with pathogens, sometimes helping the immune system recognize a threat, and sometimes accidentally giving a pathogen an easier way in. Varki found that different primate species carry their own distinct patterns of these antigens, patterns that appear to have been shaped repeatedly by whatever diseases were most dangerous in that particular species environment over millions of years. Different blood types essentially represent different trade-offs, more resistant to one disease, slightly more vulnerable to another, a genetic gamble that different environments rewarded differently depending on which pathogens were actually circulating in a given region. Here is the twist worth sitting with. There was never a single best blood type competition where one version simply won and spread everywhere, the way a single dominant trait usually does when it offers a clear advantage. Type O offered better odds against certain strains of malaria. Other types appear to carry their own advantages against different pathogens entirely. Cholera, certain strains of stomach infection, and other diseases still being mapped by researchers today. The result, sustained by what geneticists call balancing selection, is a permanent, evolutionarily maintained mix. Several different survival strategies running side by side inside the same species indefinitely, none of them powerful enough to fully replace the others. Balancing selection is rare enough in genetics that when researchers find it, it usually signals something important was at stake for an extremely long time, and few traits show the signature as clearly as blood type does. If a detail this small about your own body just turned out to be a multi-million-year-old survival strategy, this is a good moment to hit subscribe, because that same logic, an ancient trade-off hiding inside a detail you never think twice about, shows up again and again once you start looking for it. In your teeth, your sleep, your cravings, and dozens of other small habits that feel modern but are quietly running on rules millions of years old. You glance at a medical bracelet, a donor card, a single letter, and a plus or minus sign. Somewhere behind that letter is an ancestor in a malaria-heavy region who survived a fever that killed the person next to them, not through skill, not through luck exactly, but through a genetic coin flip made millions of years before either of them was born, inherited from an ancestor neither of them ever knew existed. The letter on your bracelet is not a random detail. It is the surviving half of an argument between diseases and blood cells that has been running, quietly, since long before your species had a name for either one. That argument is still technically unresolved. No blood type has ever fully won, and researchers studying regions with different disease pressures still find measurable differences in which blood types cluster, where a faint genetic echo of battles fought against pathogens most people alive today have never even heard of. The next time a nurse asks for your blood type before a procedure, that small piece of paperwork is quietly referencing one of the oldest ongoing negotiations your body has ever been part of. If stories like this one make you see your own everyday life differently, hit subscribe. A new story from the deep past goes up every week.